For 3 years, she sold bread in a small frontier town where almost nobody even knew her name. Then the richest bachelor in the county started showing up at her stall every single morning. And one day, the entire town was left speechless by what he did next. What happened after that changed both of their lives forever. Watch the full story till the end, and follow our page for more unforgettable stories like this. Before we start the story, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is right now? A cold wind moved through the small frontier town of Willow Creek as the first light of dawn touched the wooden buildings. Most people in town were still asleep, but Dolly Harper had already been awake for hours. The fire in her clay oven had been burning since before sunrise. The smell of fresh bread filled the tiny room she rented above the tannery. Her hands moved with practiced skill as she shaped dough, dusted flour across the wooden table, and prepared another day's work. For 3 years, this had been her life. Every morning she baked bread. Every morning she carried it to the small stall on Main Street. And every evening she returned home tired but satisfied. The bread was good. The work was honest. To Dolly, that had always seemed enough. She was 31 years old and had learned long ago not to expect much from life. People knew her bread. Few knew her name. Customers stopped at the stall, paid for their loaves, and moved on. Most never looked directly at her. She had become part of the street itself, something familiar, something ordinary. And then Tobias James appeared. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Dolly was arranging fresh rye loaves on the wooden board when she noticed a tall man approaching. He was handsome in a quiet way, not flashy, not trying to impress anyone. His boots were worn, but well cared for. His coat was expensive, but practical. Everything about him suggested a man who worked hard and respected what he owned. He stopped in front of the stall. Instead of immediately buying something, he picked up a rye loaf and turned it slowly in his hands. Not examining it, understanding it, like someone who knew the work behind it. A moment later, he placed it back on the board. "I'll take this one." Dolly wrapped the loaf and handed it to him. He placed the coin carefully on the counter. Then he looked directly at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. "Thank you, ma'am." The words were simple, yet something about them surprised her. She could not remember the last time anyone had called her ma'am. He tipped his hat politely and walked away. Without meaning to, Dolly watched him leave. Across the street, Cecilia Holt stood frozen beside the dry goods store. Everyone knew Cecilia. She was the bank manager's wife. For nearly a year, she had been trying to introduce her younger sister to Tobias James. And now she was staring after him with obvious confusion. Dolly returned to her work, but somehow she kept thinking about that polite stranger. The next morning he returned, and the morning after that. Soon she learned his name, Tobias James, owner of the largest ranch north of town, one of the wealthiest men in the county. Unmarried. That last detail was usually delivered with great excitement by local women. By the end of the first week, Dolly noticed herself placing the rye bread at the front of the stall before he arrived. She told herself it was simply convenience, but deep down she knew otherwise. What made Tobias different was not his money, it was his attention. Most customers rushed. Buying bread was simply another task. But Tobias stopped. He looked. He listened. One morning, he told her that her white bread had a better crust than the bread served at the hotel dining room. He did not say it as flattery. He said it as a fact, as if he respected the person responsible for making it. For some reason, that mattered. Weeks passed. The town began to notice. Women whispered from porches. Men exchanged curious looks. Questions followed wherever Tobias went. Why does he keep buying bread himself? He could send a ranch hand. Why that stall? No one understood. Dolly did not understand either. Yet every morning she still placed the rye loaf at the front. One afternoon she saw Tobias outside the livery stable. A horse had injured its leg. The animal was frightened and restless. Most people would have forced it to cooperate. Tobias did something different. He knelt beside the horse and gently rested a hand against its leg. His voice remained calm, patient, steady. Slowly the horse relaxed. Dolly watched from a distance. The sight stayed with her long after she walked away. It revealed something important. This was a man who never rushed things, a man who understood patience. A week later, a strong wind nearly destroyed her awning. Dolly struggled to hold the wooden support upright. Without a word, Tobias removed his coat and began helping. For 20 minutes he worked in the dirt beside her. Neither of them spoke much. Together they repaired the damaged frame. When it was finished, he simply picked up his coat, bought his bread, and said the same words. "Thank you, ma'am." Then he left, as though helping her had been nothing special. That night, Dolly baked a small honey cake. Before dawn, she quietly left it at his office door. No note, no name, nothing. Just the cake. She never expected him to know who left it, but several weeks later, she discovered he knew exactly where it came from. Toward the end of October, Tobias became seriously ill with fever. When Dolly heard about it, she tried to continue working, but the thought of him alone in that house refused to leave her mind. Finally, she carried broth to his home. The fever had left him weak. The room was hot and neglected. Dolly opened the window, changed the water, placed cool cloths on his forehead. She stayed through the entire night. Whenever he woke, she was there. Whenever he needed water, she handed him the glass. Near dawn, the fever finally broke. Relief washed through her. As she prepared to leave, something caught her attention. On a shelf above his desk sat a neatly folded cloth. Her cloth. The same cloth she had wrapped around the honey cake. He had kept it, carefully, like something valuable. Dolly stared at it for several seconds, then quietly left. When Tobias returned to the stall the following Monday, neither mentioned the fever. Neither mentioned the long night. Neither mentioned the cloth. He simply handed over his coin. "Thank you, ma'am." And somehow those words now meant much more. As winter approached, their friendship slowly deepened. Every Monday evening, Tobias appeared near closing time. Without asking, he helped carry the bread crates back to her room. The walk became a tradition. They talked about everything: bread, weather, work, life. Dolly found herself laughing more often, smiling more easily. One evening, she casually mentioned that a proper brick oven would double her production. The old clay oven worked, but it had limits. She quickly changed the subject. She was not asking for help, just talking. Yet Tobias became unusually quiet. Dolly noticed. She simply did not know why. Meanwhile, certain people in town grew increasingly unhappy. Mrs. Fenwick was the loudest. According to her, a man like Tobias should marry someone from a wealthy family, someone with status, someone like Lottie Aldridge, not a bread seller. Again and again she hinted at it. Again and again, Dolly ignored her. Still, the comments hurt. One Friday morning, Mrs. Fenwick finally confronted the situation publicly. Standing near the stall, she spoke loudly about social expectations and proper matches. Several people stopped to listen. Dolly kept her hands on the bread. Tobias listened silently. Then he spoke. "My father built his first home with a carpenter's daughter." The crowd fell quiet. "No one in this town speaks poorly of my mother." Then he turned toward Dolly, looked directly at her, and deliberately said, "Ma'am." The meaning was unmistakable. The crowd understood. Mrs. Fenwick understood. Most importantly, Dolly understood. Tobias respected her. Completely. Months later, Tobias missed a day at the stall. For the first time, Dolly realized how much his presence mattered. She wrapped his loaf and saved it, even though she told herself she would not. When he finally returned, he explained that he had been in Abilene filing paperwork. A deed. Dolly thought little of it, until weeks later. One Monday, he asked her to see a building. Curious, she followed. The structure stood one street away from Main Street. Strong walls, large windows, excellent location. Inside stood something that stole her breath. A beautiful brick oven. Perfect. Everything she had ever wanted. Everything she had only dreamed about. She slowly walked through the room, running her fingers across the counters, looking at the shelves, feeling tears threaten to rise. Then she turned around. Tobias stood in the doorway, holding his hat, watching her. "It's yours," he said softly. Dolly froze. "The deed is already signed." For several seconds, she could not speak. Then Tobias stepped closer. "I've listened to you for months." His voice was steady. "I know what you can do." He swallowed, then finally said the words he had been carrying for so long. "I'd like you to be my wife, Dolly." The room became perfectly still. Dolly looked at him. This patient man, this kind man, the man who fixed broken awnings, who cared for injured horses, who saved pieces of cloth, who treated a bread seller with respect when no one else did. All her life she had learned not to expect happiness. Now happiness stood directly in front of her, waiting. She reached for his hand. "Yes." The breath left Tobias's chest in a long, relieved His fingers closed around hers. 5 weeks later, they married in the small church. The entire town attended. Some out of joy, some out of curiosity, some because they still could not believe it. But none of that mattered. When Dolly walked down the aisle, Tobias looked at her as though she were the only person in the room. The bakery opened in January. Before sunrise on opening day, Dolly stood alone inside. Warmth filled every corner. The smell of fresh bread surrounded her. The brick oven glowed steadily. Sunlight spilled through the windows. For the first time in her life, She owned something that truly belonged to her. Then the door opened. Tobias entered, at exactly the same hour he always had. He approached the counter. His rye loaf was already waiting. He placed a coin on the wood, looked at her, and smiled. "Ma'am?" The word was no longer a greeting. It was a private promise, a reminder of where everything had begun. Dolly smiled back and returned to her work. 2 months later, she discovered she was carrying their child. For a week, she kept the secret close to her heart. Then one Saturday morning, she told him. Tobias sat at the kitchen table reviewing ranch accounts. Dolly walked over, waited until he looked up, then quietly shared the news. For several seconds, he said nothing. He simply stared. Not because he was unhappy, because the happiness was too large for words. Finally, he stood, placed both hands gently against her face, and looked at her with tears shining in his eyes. Outside, the town continued as always. Wagons rolled down the street. Children played. People bought bread. Life moved forward. But inside that warm kitchen, everything had changed. The woman nobody noticed had found someone who truly saw her. And the man everyone wanted had chosen the one person who never tried to impress him. Together, they built a life from respect, patience, kindness, and love. And like the bread that first brought them together, it was made carefully, day by day, with steady hands and honest hearts. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way till the end. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. It really helps us a lot. If you want to watch more exciting stories like this, don't forget to subscribe our page right now. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is right now? And if this story touched your heart, please send some stars. Every single star gives us huge motivation to keep creating more amazing videos for you. See you in the next story. Take care of you, friends. Take care.